So good evening, everyone. I am Councilmember Lourdes Barroso de Padilla. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I said before, happy Fat Tuesday. Thank you for joining us for this very important conversation. I hope you go out and celebrate after. Today in council chambers, we have around 10 folks who will be testifying. We've also received about 10 to 11 pieces of written testimony on pieces of proposed legislation that we have. And so the way this hearing will go this evening is we will have two short presentations, one to kind of center us a little bit around the problem that we are working to solve, and then another piece where we will discuss a little bit more about what this legislation looks like. And then we'll hear from our speakers, and at times we'll refer back to folks who have presented to just get a little bit of clarification around the legislation. We'll have some conversation, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. So I want to first start by thanking my staff, Maris Lemus, for coordinating this evening. I want to thank Jessica Cáceres, my legislative aide, and Kirsten Estosi from our Legislative Research Department, who have really been the architects behind this effort and really thinking about what this legislation could look like in partnership with me. And I just want to thank you, ladies, for all of the work that you have done. And I want to just give us a little bit of context for why we're here this evening and why are we even thinking about proposing legislation. So first and foremost, and I always like to start from just a very personal perspective, I think being both a woman and being a Latina, the pay gap and the equity gap has definitely been something that has affected my career throughout the entirety of my career, whether I was paid yearly, whether I was paid hourly. I mean, we even saw this in the organization that I work for when we did an equity review, that I made significantly less than people who had my same title, who were not as tenured as I was within the organization, by thousands of dollars, right? And I think that as companies go through this process and they start thinking about how they're paying people and why they're paying people what they are, I think folks would start to be surprised about where people in their organizations land. I know we have some labor leaders who are here today. I mean, this is part of what this movement is about. My mother was a union, or my mother-in-law, she is my mother, but she was a union organizer, and we would often have conversations about this, about how coming together to really unionize and to organize is a way that we protect workers and the way that we increase what people make. And labor unions are a perfect example of how we already have equity within the system, and they'll talk a little bit more about that. I also just want to give a few statistics, and then I'm going to hand it over for a presentation again to add more context for the conversation this evening. So women are paid 16% less than men, earning just 84 cents for every dollar a man earns. That's only increased, that 84 cents has only increased by 1/4 since the 1970s. That's literally the entirety of my lifetime. Black women earn 64 cents and Latina earn just 46 cents on the dollar that every man earns. So for women, that's $400,000 that we will lose out on, right? On average, all women. For Black and Latina women, that is $1 million over the course of my lifetime, the course of my daughter's lifetime, right? That they will not be able to access those wages. And the pay gap is directly contributed to the wealth gap. Less disposable income forces many women to rely on credit more than men might have to, contributing to a difference in credit history. So tonight, as we talk about a salary inquiry prohibition, right, making it so that your employer cannot ask about your past salary during the course of the employment process, during the whether it's on an application or throughout the interview or when they're confirming your employment, what that does is it evens the playing field. So as an employer, I know that I have a specific salary range, and as a prospective employee, you have a number. And we are coming to the table within a true negotiation, not starting you from a deficit, but really valuing the work and understanding what the value is of the work and the budget that I have to pay for that work. The second piece is really starting to have a conversation about what does credit history say about you? What does credit history say about our employees, and how are we using that information to make determinations about people? And we've heard many things as we've had conversations. This is our first public hearing, but we've heard from more than nearly 100 business owners, from large corporations to small business owners, about how they use these pieces of information to make determinations about people's characters. And for perspective, as your elected official, no one knows my credit history. No one knows the things that my past salary, right? Unless I'm asked to present these things to the public, is that not asked? We have to jump through hoops to work at a call center sometimes, right? These are times when we are overreaching these pieces of information to talk about your character, not taking into consideration that you may be someone who's in the middle of a divorce, someone who has had medical bills that you've had to pay, someone who's gone through a hardship. So this is just a moment in time, but not the totality of your character. So again, these strategies are about how we are changing the conversation about how we think about our hiring practices in the city of Columbus. This is about adding equity into a system, about changing the system so we are invested in the prosperity of our people and their families. So before we get started, I want to acknowledge my colleagues who are here with us today, Councilmember Remy and Council President Shannon Harden. I would like to open the floor if there's any comments that you would like to make before we get started.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you for your leadership on this conversation, the legislation that we're speaking about. I'm excited about any conversation that could help close the pay equity gap, specifically for women and people of color. So for that, I'm grateful. Grateful for you convening us. I'm grateful for the work that you've done. But secondly, my colleagues know that I speak often about process. I'm grateful for your process because you just spoke about the 100 or so business folks that you have been listening to. One of the main functions of a council, of a legislative body, when you're thinking about providing service to 906,000 people, this is the body that listens. And I have watched your process over the last several months, your engagement with folks that maybe came in agreeing with you, and some who came in disagreeing with this approach. But yet, and still, you created the platforms, the space, and even tonight convened us to have this conversation. Process matters, and I think you're running a very strong process. So I'm grateful for that. And then my final point is something that you alluded to when you talked about your time leading City Year. Is that, and this is more so for all of our business owners, I think this conversation is about being intentional. And, you know, as council president, I have the HR fiduciary responsibility for 42, 43, 44 folks, the financial responsibility. And even though we talk about these type of policies and we talk about equity all the time, it wasn't until we did a deep dive and looked at our pay structures that we found that we had work to do. And we had to be intentional to fix those changes. And so this is not about anyone's values or anyone being intentionally paying women or people of color less. It's about systemic issues that have been there that have created these issues. And this council takes very seriously our role at correcting systemic issues. And so we hope that for all of those folks around the community who want to be a part of this conversation, that they enter it with an open heart, with an open mind, and certainly not thinking that this is a chastising anybody. We're just trying to do what is right. What is right. Because when a woman makes more, when a person of color makes more, that means families make more. And that is good for all of us. So thank you, Councilmember, for your leadership. I apologize I have to hop out, but I'm very excited to hear the feedback from this hearing.
Yeah, and I just echo those sentiments. I mean, I think that when you as chair of the administration for the city of Columbus and the 8,500 full-time employees and the myriad of part-time employees, we know that institutionally things can go awry. And certainly people not being intentional over the years of how they operate their business, sometimes it's not intentional, but it's because of neglect and never diving deep into it. So the work that you're doing is really, exciting, because I think that we as a city should stand for equality, progressiveness, and moving towards the opportunity so that everybody is on an equal footing. And so looking forward to hearing, the comments and through the testimony this evening, and certainly look forward to supporting you as a council. We will make a big difference in the city, and it's all because of your work. So thank you very much, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I just also, last point, and then I'm going to hand over the floor, but whenever we move the people furthest from justice, closer to justice, all boats inevitably rise. And we'll see that, and I know that during the presentations we're going to talk about that, but I think that when we talk about pay equity, this is something that benefits, while we are centering the conversation on people of color and women, this is a strategy that will ensure that all people make more money. And that's ultimately what we want. So with that, I would like to now invite Dr. Sierra King. The floor is yours. If you would introduce yourself, and you can dive into your presentation.
Good evening. Honorable council members and distinguished guests, it is my privilege and duty to stand before you this evening to advocate for pay equity. For centuries, our country, the country that my ancestors helped to build, has not fully recognized the humanity of Black women. In fact, it wasn't until the late 1980s that Black feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality. Arguably one of the most important theoretical contributions to critical social theory to date, intersectionality necessitates that when looking at inequities, our analyses include the ways in which some experience multiple forms of oppression that occur simultaneously, creating a very unique and often very disparate lived experience. Or, in the words of the Combahee River Collective in their 1977 manifesto, major systems of oppression are interlocking. The major source of difficulty in political work is that we are not just trying to fight oppression on one front or even two, but instead to address a whole range of oppressions. Of course, this comes with negative economic, social, political, and health consequences that impact families for generations. In Crenshaw's study of de Graaf and Reed versus General Motors, 1976, Crenshaw highlighted and gave name to something our ancestors, mothers, and grandmothers had long already known about: our deep devaluation and erasure in this country's political and legal systems, particularly in the name of capitalist exploitation. In this particular legal case, a group of Black women plaintiffs alleged that their employer, General Motors, was discriminating against them on the basis of not one, but two protected classes, race and gender. The court found that these 5 Black women could not combine the claims of race and sex discrimination because that would go beyond the scope of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This decision codified that Black women could not be a protected class and must either bring a racial or sexual discrimination suit forward, but not both. In other words, our legal system did not have a sophisticated enough analysis to understand that Black women and other women of color occupy a unique social position in our society, one that is historically unprotected and invisible. While we credit Crenshaw for this intervention, we also know there were many before, known and unknown, who advocated for more critical analyses in law and policy to center women of color. For example, Sojourner Truth, who in her 1851 Ohio speech asked, "Ain't I a woman?" when talking about her race, gender, and social class while advocating for women's suffrage, a right she'd be granted much later than her white counterparts. Or Dr. Anna Julia Cooper, who in her 1892 collection of essays, A Voice from the South, argued, "There is material in them being Black women, well worth your while. Only the Black woman can say, when and where I enter, in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence, and without suing or special patronage, then and there the whole race enters with me." Applied to this context, the whole race speaks to the ways in which we all benefit from social change, and in this case, equitable pay practices. Over 130 years later, it's evident that these women had a very astute understanding of social systems and structures. It's just a shame that their words still ring so true today. A first-generation college student, I come from a lineage of brilliant Black women who had astute understandings of social systems too. Those closest to me being my mother Barbara and my late grandmother Pearl. I watched them break their bodies down to the bone to provide. I watched them deal with racist, sexist, and classist incidents of humiliation at the hands of their employers in the name of capitalism. But I also watched them experience unbridled joy and laughter and good meals and good music on Saturday mornings while we cleaned and good soap operas, because they were very into those too. Their tired bodies didn't sleep or nap much when I was growing up, but in the off chance I caught them resting their eyes, as they'd say, while sitting upright in a chair, I now know what they were doing. They were, of course, stealing away minutes from the grind to rest their bodies, but they were also dreaming, unencumbered of a radical future of happiness, opportunity, and equity for me. They figured, by their own analyses and calculations, that if they labored, and labored some more, that it just may grant me some relief in my working future. My grandmother passed 23 years ago, her tired body exhausted from the ravages of the outcomes of negative social determinants on health, on Black women who are overworked and underpaid. I had an artist create this painting as a gift to my mother a few years ago. It comes from 3 separate pictures spanning decades combined into one so that we'd all exist in the same place at the same time, even if only metaphorically. My graduation from OSU with a PhD in an infant was one of the proudest days of all of our lives. Unfortunately, I can't say I remember it much because I pushed myself to exhaustion giving birth at home because of our country's dismal maternal health outcomes, undergoing an unexpected hospital stay for an unrelated illness, working full-time, navigating finances with my husband without paid maternity leave, and knowing that stopping wasn't an option because as Black women and women of color, we're raised to know that we have to work twice as hard for less. So I stand here today on the shoulders of giants, known and unknown, for my daughter, who is pictured here, and for baby A and baby B, who will join our family and be added to this painting this summer. Hopefully, pay equity is a change I'll see in my lifetime, unlike many I've discussed in this presentation. If not, I proudly pass the torch to my daughters and son, who I know and trust will know exactly what to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King. Now I would like to hand the floor over to Kirsten Estosi to talk a little bit more about the specific pieces of the legislation for folks to understand what both the issue is and then why we're taking this approach and what it looks like. So, Kirsten, take it away.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me, council members, and it's been a privilege to work on this legislation. So I'll just run through some of our why and how, and just exactly what this legislation does. It is working to address a number of the problems that we've already talked about tonight, and thank you, Dr. Austin King, for what you shared, and we can't fix it all with this legislation, but we hope to just make an effort at some solutions to the pay gap, the equity gap, the wealth gap that we see in our country and in Central Ohio. I do want to speak to the credit history portion. So there's the salary history portion that the Councilmember brought up and the credit history portion that the Councilmember mentioned. And we've talked a little bit about the pay gap, but regarding credit checks, it's 4 times more common for an individual who is Black to have a credit score that is just considered fair or below 620 than it is for a white individual. So there's a lot of discrimination within that credit system, within the lending system, and that is due to a number of external factors that are often outside of folks' control. Divorce was one of the examples that was mentioned. Medical circumstances were mentioned, and issues of employment can contribute to that. Predatory lending practices can contribute to that. And that's one of the reasons that credit history is an important part of this conversation. I'm just going to grab the clicker. Thank you. So we have these 2 pieces to our legislative proposal. The first would bar employers from inquiring as to a job applicant's salary history. So they could not ask either in a screening process with an application or in a conversational setting, in any setting. They cannot try to obtain a job applicant's salary history, their previous earnings, whether that be their current salary or any previous earnings. And if that information were voluntarily presented, they cannot rely solely on that information when making a job offer, when negotiating salary, and of course, under no circumstances could they retaliate against a job applicant for not sharing that information. The consumer credit history piece is similar. It is barring employers from seeking the consumer credit history, which of course includes the credit score of any job applicant under most circumstances. There are a number of reasons that employer may have to seek a credit score of a job applicant, including federal or state law under some circumstances. And so there are a number of exemptions that are written into the legislation for this piece. Additionally, the legislation overall only applies to businesses that have fewer than 15 employees. So those really, really small businesses, these are still best practices for them, but we don't want to overly burden them with this legislation, and so they are technically exempted from this. Additionally, I wanted to mention that there is a 365-day implementation period in the legislation because taking the time to accommodate these changes and implement them into HR practices, especially in a large company, could take some time. And so we want to make sure that we accommodate that. The reason this is important is because these practices, even if they aren't intended in any way to discriminate against someone, can perpetuate systemic discrimination. And if someone is paid less over the course of their life, and then that information is used to determine their salary, it can continue to perpetuate their lack of earnings throughout their career. And as mentioned, Black and Latino women can be losing $1 million over the course of a 40-year career. For women overall, that number is $400,000. So the impact here is really massive. This law is really common. This is a long list. You might not even be able to see all the states and cities on this list, and I've broken it out by states and cities, by credit history and salary history. These are all places that have similar legislation to what we are looking at here in Columbus. You'll see Cincinnati and Toledo on that list for salary history. And if that city's list seems short to you, it's because cities are leading the way in this practice. When cities implement this law, states follow. And so a lot of those states that have these laws, you can see that they've implemented it recently in many cases, especially regarding salary history. It's because the cities that were in them led the way. Another way that this practice can originate is by cities or states implementing it internally. And so here at the City of Columbus, we don't ask people when we're hiring them to work here at the city what their salary history is. And it's not a law that we made, it was just a policy that was implemented because it's a best practice in HR. But here we are discussing this legislation. So we've got Cincinnati and Toledo on that list. every state that is on the credit history list, California, Delaware, Maryland, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and more, every one of those states is on the salary history list. And there are more states where these laws exist, but these are ones that specifically have laws similar to what we're looking at in Columbus. And then I wanted to talk about the fact that this actually works. So with salary history, this is that rising tide lifts all boats piece. In areas where salary history has been implemented, where a ban on salary history inquiries has been implemented, we see that workers who are changing jobs, across all workers, their earnings increase over 4%. And then for women, that number is 6.2%, and for people of color, the number is 5.9%. So it's basically 6%. So it's very effective. It doesn't close the 16% wage gap that we talked about, and we need to continue to work towards that. But it is making a difference for everyone, and means that families earn more. We talked about what that wage gap is for women versus men in our country. I find it really interesting that for mothers, they earn 74 cents on a father's dollar. Mothers are penalized when they have children, and fathers are often rewarded in their wages when they have children. So this really does benefit families. And then lastly, the credit history inquiries prohibition is also effective. Areas that have low credit, census tracts that have low credit, see employment increase between 2.3 and 3.3%. This is from across the country, a study that was done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and by Harvard University. They found that employment increases. And we know that in an area where employment is increasing, other good things are increasing too. So these are really effective policies that we're excited to be having a conversation about today, and look forward to answering any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. Councilmember, you don't have any questions? One other interesting tidbit I'd like to add before we open it up for public commentary is PayScale, which is a technology-based firm that both looks at trends around like salary. They actually did a study or a survey where they actually showed that in a comparison between men and women, when women were not asked what their salary, because you can, during the course of an interview, you can say, I don't want to share my salary history, we're either not hired or paid lower. And in situations where men were asked for the salary, when they were given the salary, they were actually paid less. And in situations where men did not decline, they were actually paid more. So I think that this is another interesting trend of when we talk about the gender gap and how that comes up in different spaces and places. So thank you for that presentation. We're now going to move to public commentary. So we have again, we have 10 speakers signed up. We will go down the list. I'll let you know if you're on deck. The one thing that we ask is when you come to the podium, if you could just state your name and any organization that you represent. You do have 3 minutes for your testimony. And then also, if you're comfortable sharing your gender pronoun just so that I refer to you correctly, or if you just want to let me know how you would like for me to refer to you so that I can respect that as well. So first up, and also give Lourdes Barroso de Padilla all the grace in potential name mispronunciation. So the first one I want to call up is Lalitha I practiced this, Lalitha. Come up and teach me how to say your name correctly. And then Alice Fuller, you are on deck.
It's Lalita Pamirigantam. Yes,
Perfect.
It's just phonetically.
Thank you.
Phonetic. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify here today. Like I said, my name is Lalita Pamirigantam. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm representing YWCA Columbus. We are a shelter agency and a childcare agency on a mission to eliminate racism and empower women. We are so thankful for the council member's office and their diligent work in crafting this piece of legislation that would, if passed, support women of color and other marginalized groups by limiting the usage of credit history and/or salary histories to determine the qualification of a candidate or the starting salary of that candidate. Discriminatory hiring practices such as relying on previous salary history or credit history only preserve the status quo, one that YWCA Columbus is determined to break. We are confident that passing this legislation would see an increase of earnings for marginalized workers and empower women to seek and gain higher paying jobs with better compensation. I won't belabor the statistics that are in my written testimony because the council member already went over them. But I also do want to point out really quick that when we're talking about AAPI women and their the wage gap, there's actually a bigger gap within that monolith that is not explored because we don't have disaggregated data on that. And I want to point out that transgender women also report very low earnings and a huge pay gap, earning 60 cents for every dollar that the typical US worker makes. So when we're talking about pay equity, it really runs this gamut of statistics across the board. These are also the same populations that are disproportionately impacted by homelessness, lack of access to childcare, systemic and interpersonal violence, and other forms of oppression. The problem is clear. Systemic and structural biases that showcase themselves in interpersonal exchanges, such as hiring processes, are impacting the ability of marginalized workers to realize their full potential in and outside of the workplace. The use of salary histories to screen out candidates might screen out marginalized workers who are well qualified for the job, but whose associated price tag does not accurately reflect the value of their work for many different reasons. According to the Center for American Progress, women historically experience pay disparity for a number of the following reasons: workplace pay discrimination, other forms of discrimination in the workplace, needing to work fewer hours to accommodate caregiving responsibilities, leaving the workplace altogether for those responsibilities, being laid off, or previously working in workplaces considered women's work. The use of credit histories for similar reasons is also steeped in sexist biases. Even if an individual woman manages her credit very well, systemically women have lower credit scores than men because of the persistent pay gap, disallowing them from paying off debt at the same rates as men. Women and marginalized workers are entering a pool of candidates with a devalued price tag that follows them around from job to job, and it costs them and the workforce literally. Looking at my time, I will skip to the very end. Considering the evidence provided in our testimony, we do support this legislation. We are really thankful for the step forward, and though it is only a step forward and there's so much more work to do, we're hopeful for the families that we house who are amongst the most marginalized women and for every woman who would really benefit from this legislation. Thank you. I'll take questions.
Thank you for being here this evening. Thank you for providing testimony and all the work that the YWCA does to, again, invest in the prosperity of women in our community. I also appreciate you elevating. I mean, we highlighted some of the biggest disparities. We know that there are other disparities, and I appreciate you shining a light on that, because I think as we dig into the data, I mean, I think that people will be really shocked once we look at what those big margins of differences are for people, especially as we go layers, as Dr. Austin King shared at the beginning. Once we talk about our intersectionality, I mean, then you really start to see even more disparities come into play. So thank you for elevating that during this conversation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. May I respond really quickly?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just really want to highlight that we are very cognizant of the fact that without data, we cannot have results. And so we're really looking forward to when this legislation is passed, and collecting data around this legislation would be super helpful to closing that gap, especially within those areas, especially transgender women and AAPI women, where we don't have that data currently.
No, and I appreciate that. And the other thing, too, is that I am very optimistic, but I want to say that this narrows the gap. This does not close the gap. So thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you so much.
So Alice Fuller is at the podium, and then next up is Jamie Schumacher.
Good evening, Councilmember Barroso de Padilla and guests. My name is Alice Fuller. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a resident of Northland, president of the Northland Area Business Association, co-founder of Elevate Northland, a business owner, and a member of the National Association of Women Business Owners Columbus chapter. I'm speaking on behalf of myself this evening in favor of the pay equity legislation for the city of Columbus. Columbus has an opportunity to help lead the way for Ohio with this legislation and to prevent all women, and especially women of color, from current and future salary loss. When I was a 24-year-old newspaper reporter covering crime in the city of Chicago, I was working for a local newswire service. I had taken a pay cut from a $20,000 a year job to an $18,000 a year job so that I could cover the city instead of the suburbs, in hopes that I could advance my career more quickly. Since I was already a homeowner, I also took a job on the weekends in the photo department at Walgreens to make up for the lost salary. Shortly after I took that lower paying job, I broke a news story that no one else could get, and it was a big deal. Day after day, the daily newspaper in Chicago had to run my wire stories because their own staff reporters couldn't get the sources that I had. Eventually, they called me and offered me a job to save themselves the embarrassment. A staff reporter job at the Daily Southtown at that time had lousy benefits, but the $29,000 a year I was offered seemed like a windfall. I accepted and performed well, becoming part of the elite front page team at the paper. A couple of years later, driving to a conference with my colleague Jonathan, I learned that he was offered $33,000 to start at the same paper. He was younger than me at the time and fresh out of college. He had no real-world experience. He hadn't proven himself by breaking news like I had, and in fact outperforming the newspaper's existing veteran crime reporter as I had. But he was a guy and I was a girl, and I had told the person hiring me what I was earning before. Year after year, my 3% raise was calculated from my starting salary, so the deficits compounded compared to my friend Jonathan. He also thought it was unfair that he was earning more than I was for the same job. As women continue to work and age, change jobs, move up, and negotiate raises, each of these small instances of inequality compounds. Over a 40-year career, the average woman is losing out on more than $400,000 compared to what she would have earned if she were a man. For Black and Latino women, it's worse, closer to $1 million. All because employers pay not based on the role and what it commands, but based on what they think they can get away with, because women have historically earned less and disclosed lower previous salaries. Please support the pay equity legislation.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you for providing testimony. I also want to highlight the work that you're doing with Elevate Northland. I think especially in a place where, we have one of the other women that we do not often talk about as we talk about pay equity is immigrant women. And I know that as you are looking at Elevate Northland and thinking about being an incubator for those small businesses, it is a lot of our immigrant, refugee, and migrant population that especially lives in that area, but that are those small business owners. I mean, and this is part of that, right? Is like when you can't access a system, you create a system for yourself. And being an entrepreneur is part of that, So I appreciate you being here and appreciate the work that you do every day. Thank you.
Thank you. And the immigrant and refugee women, I think, some of the wage gap can be narrowed with education and with, if I were a better negotiator, right, like I could have asked for more money and all of that. But, when have just come to this country and someone asks you a question, like you answer the question. Like it's a lot of our employees of both men and women are, just afraid of everything. And the fact actually Elevate Northland's very successful because we're clearly not the government. And so people trust us. But it's difficult to tell someone like, oh, well, just don't answer the question. I mean, that's hard advice to give to immigrant and refugee populations. So this kind of legislation giving people cover and making it illegal to even ask the question is really important. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Come on down, Jamie. And then next after Jamie, we have Eric. Eric, I feel like I'm going to also say your name incorrectly, but you're going to teach me how when you come to this podium.
Chair Barroso de Padilla, members of council, my name is Jamie Shoemaker. I currently serve as Central Ohio Labor Council Political Liaison, and I am the past president of ASME Local 2191, representing workers at Columbus Public Health Department. As a labor leader and a woman, I know that pay equity does not happen by accident. Study after study has conclusively demonstrated that women, particularly women of color, are discriminated against. When it comes to their wages, the practice of employer inquiring as an applicant's past wage has direct impact on what an employer is willing to pay the applicant. As a labor leader, I have helped negotiate collective bargaining agreements to prevent wage discrimination in union workplaces. I'd encourage workers here in Columbus concerned about workplace issues like pay equity to consider forming a union to help prevent wage discriminations. Workers can find more information about how to form a union here in Columbus at the Central Ohio Workers Center website. While not every worker in Columbus enjoys protections of collective bargaining agreement, this legislation brought forward by Councilmember Barroso de Padilla will have a significant impact on ensuring workers are paid what they are worth and not simply according to what they made at their last workplace. I am pleased that Columbus City Council is moving forward with legislation to help bring important workplace protections, often only found in collective bargaining agreements, to all workers here in Columbus. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jamie. I also want to, wait, don't go anywhere. I'm going to say something to everyone who's here. Can you just talk for just a second? I know you mentioned this. I think this is important as we're talking about some of the, especially the groups that we're talking about in places where there might be unions, like just that collective bargaining agreement, what the benefits are of folks when you do have a union in your workplace of just a quick little
For
why you
collective
should.
bargaining agreements, I would say it's based off the job description. It's not based off of if it's a man or a woman, it's based off the job description and years of experience. So when we go to negotiate a contract and we're looking at that, we're looking off years of experience. We don't, when we're doing wages, and same with I'm familiar with the city's pay scale mostly because that's what I did. And we would increase it. And then we would go back and reevaluate it. And if they had better education or higher education, it didn't matter if they're a man or a woman, we made sure that they got paid the same.
And I appreciate that. And I wanted you to just highlight that approach because I think that as we talk about pay equity, we've seen pockets of best practices in whether it's industries, whether it's with unions, that are also leading the way. So I think when we talk about this strategy, for some folks, it feels like such a mind shift when really it's about just a change in practice here and there, and it's a game changer.
It does make a big difference, yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
Come on down, Eric. And then next up, we have Pat Kearns-Davis. And then after Pat Kearns-Davis, we have Danielle Smith.
Good evening, Councilmember Barroso de Padilla. Thank you for your leadership and the opportunity to speak in favor of pay equity legislation. I'm Eric Krolak, he, him, CEO of Action for Children, which is Columbus's child care resource and referral agency, providing services to parents, caregivers, and early childhood educators, as well as the child care programs they are employed at in Franklin and the 6 surrounding counties. Together, we reach more than 50,000 children in the region every year. Tonight, I'm also representing the 160-member Human Service Chamber of Franklin County, where I'm a member of the board and also Public Policy Committee Chair. I want to share a little bit about what Action for Children has done. We, 5 years ago, took the same steps that are outlined in this legislation, did so on our own, but prompted by the work of the Columbus Women's Commission to sign the Columbus Commitment Pledge for Pay Equity. Knowing how race and gender discrimination have limited employment opportunities and depressed wages in the early childhood workforce, we took this commitment quite seriously. I won't go through the written testimony which outlines the steps we took, establishing a living wage, reviewing our pay practices, changing the application on a number of levels, and also establishing paid parental leave. But just want to emphasize that we did this on our own, again, prompted through the Columbus Women's Commission. Now, this legislation, if there's anything I want to share with you tonight, it's that inequality is built. It will need to be unbuilt. And this legislation takes important steps in that direction, setting a standard for all employers together that includes not asking applicants about their salary histories or soliciting their credit scores. These questions, this information, in effect creates a feedback loop that distorts the process of matching the best qualified applicant for the job at hand. Misogyny and white supremacy together have created biases and structures that have relegated women and relegated Blacks, Latinos, and other minoritized groups to overrepresentation in lower wage occupations. When an employer obtains salary history or credit scores, knows your number, they are seeing not the content of an applicant's character, nor the accounting of their skills or talents. They are seeing the accumulated results of decades of social and economic systems that favor men over women, whites over other races and ethnicities, and the affluent over all. To match the best people for the job and to get this right for Columbus, we must unbuild the systems that have created the inequality that plagues us today. Now, we know this legislation will work for addressing pay disparities, but the important thing also to recognize is that unbuilding inequality will benefit us all, not only in a moral sense, but also because where this legislation has been adopted in the past, there have been benefits to applicants as a whole. Without that salary information, employers focused on relevant data when making offers on a somewhat more level playing field. The same researchers that have identified that with employers barred from asking about salary history, workers who changed jobs saw their pay increase by 5% more than comparable workers charged jobs in the absence of these employer standards. Again, this is from a slightly different set, pre-pandemic set of 14 states that made this legislative change. The point, though, is that inequality has been built. It will need to be unbuilt, and in doing so, all will benefit. We can all move forward together. Thank you.
And I do have a follow-up. First of all, thank you so much for that testimony. You're going to be part of the road show from now on, so clear your calendar. I would like to ask you a quick question around when you made the changes, and I know that this is, you might not have hardcore data at your disposal in this moment because I'm putting you on the spot, but can you talk about what changes you started to see organizationally, whether that's like culture or if you do have some data around what that experience was like for your workforce at Action for Children?
Councilmember Barroso de Padilla, thank you for the question. I don't have specific data to mind. I do know that we made a very intentional effort to look to pay structures, to align those to make sure that they were in accordance with the requirements of the job and not just tenure in a position or other characteristics that may or may not have anything to do with the individual's ability to carry out the position well. But I don't have a particular data point. Action for Children is a little unusual. Our workforce is majority female. It's better representative of Franklin County than in many places. It's actually quite represented in terms of race and ethnicity. So it wasn't so much a matter of attracting a more diverse workforce, but of making sure that the way we were treating that workforce was more equitable. And I have to say, probably the most tangible thing that comes to mind is the benefit of pushing ourselves on what pay equity meant and to introduce a paid parental leave program that is now at 12 weeks that really allows us to live our values with our staff in a way that I don't think we were before.
And then last question, how difficult was it for you to make these changes organizationally in your hiring practices?
Not as difficult as you would imagine, Councilmember Barroso de Padilla. It required some intentionality. It required some effort at really focusing on the data, tracking it a little differently. It required some guesswork when coming to things like what does changing parental leave, what would that actually cost us? In fact, it has benefited us. So maybe a little effort in terms of figuring out what data and how to make sure we were collecting it, but it was not a great cost burden.
Got it. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, and thank you again.
Absolutely. So next, Pat Kearns-Davis. I think she might not be here. Is that correct? Okay. Unfortunately, no, but thank you for the offer. Next, Danielle Smith. Is Danielle here? Danielle? Okay, moving along. Tasha Lomo. Come on down, Tasha. And then after Tasha, Mark Fluharty.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tasha Lomo. I go by she, her pronouns. It is my pleasure to be here today on behalf of Zora's House to speak about the impact of pay equity on myself and women of color in my community. As the only co-working space and leadership incubator created by and for women plus of color in the state of Ohio, the women of Zora's House recognize how critical the proposed legislation will be in closing the racial and gender wealth gap. Decades of discrimination in employment, lending policies, debt collection, and even criminal prosecution have left Black communities and other communities of color at a disadvantage when it comes to being fairly compensated and able to have their financial lives fairly assessed. To me, this legislation is not just theoretical, it is personal. As a young Black woman professional, I have often felt sold short of my previous employment opportunities. In my development, I was not coached on how to negotiate my salary and didn't even know that this was a possibility. In previous positions, I have often been asked what I have made in my past work experiences, and in honor of transparency, I have been honest about my earnings. Many employment opportunities were not transparent about their salary ranges and full earning potential of the positions I was interviewing for, which led me to being underpaid in comparison to my colleagues. Like many first-generation wealth builders, credit scores and credit reporting were foreign subjects to me until a couple years ago. Like many in my generation, I dealt with hefty student loan debt and a lack of financial education, which impacted my credit. Checking my credit score as a part of the hiring process would put me at a disadvantage in comparison to my peers. There are many women of color in my personal life and in my community who would experience the same fate. This legislation is crucial to the equitable economic advancement of women of color in Columbus and beyond. It will level the playing field not just for my generation, but for generations to come. Myself and other women of color deserve to experience equitable hiring practices in order to elevate their careers. Our community deserves the positive impact this will have on us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasha. Thank you for, I also, again, want to just recognize the work of Zora's House and the magic, for real, that it creates in bringing together and harnessing the power of women and creating safe spaces where women can come together to collaborate, to be co-conspirators, to work on things like pay equity legislation, and to also create and elevate the work of women in our community. So thank you for being here this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you for leading the charge.
Mr. Fluharty, come on down. After Mark, it will be J. Avery Frost on deck, and then we'll round out with LaShondra Baker.
Should have saved the best for last. Good evening, Chair Barroso D. Padilla, members of council. As you know, my name is Mark Fluharty, and I proudly serve as the Executive Director of the Central Ohio Labor Council, AFL-CIO. The council represents over 100,000 union workers here in Central Ohio. I'm here this evening to voice the Labor Council's support for this piece of legislation to help bring more pay equity to the workplace in Columbus. Union members enjoy pay equality as our collective bargaining agreements ensure that our members are paid the contract wage regardless of their gender, race, or sexual identity. These collective bargaining protections have ensured that union members do not face wage discrimination, which is the target of this legislation. Therefore, it may be surprising to some that the Central Ohio Labor Council is here this evening speaking in support of this legislation. Organized labor has long advocated for all workers, not just those that are our members. That is why we commend the chair for bringing forward this legislation, which is focused on not only helping to create pay equality for the workforce that do not have a collective bargaining agreement, but also sending a message our elected leaders can bring forward worker protections at the local level to help ensure that more workers have access to a living wage here in Columbus. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I just want to, again, just elevate, as I said before, and you said it beautifully in this testimony, that it is about elevating all workers, right? Even if you're not a union worker, but how are we protecting and investing in our people? And so thank you for being here today. Thank you for all of the work that you do every day, my
You're
friends.
welcome. Union, yes.
J. Avery Frost. Good evening.
All right, good evening. My name is J. Avery Frost, pronoun she, her, hers. I'm Executive Director of the Central Ohio African American Chamber of Commerce and Freedom Equity, Inc. Both organizations focus on empowering and promoting Black business owners and Black businesses. And in our conversations, we often have these conversations because it's really important. You know, we don't always talk about small businesses in these conversations, but it is really important that they make sure that they're paying themselves living wages as well as their employees. So just a couple of statistics. So I thought it was interesting that the average credit score in the whole state of Ohio is just 685. And so a lot of times we know that credit score is weaponized against people of color, but across the board, everybody's under 700. So that's just something to point out. And then also, we're very well aware that Black women are more frequently the heads of households in their homes, and therefore carry debts and burdens of not just people in their homes, but also people in their families and in their spheres. And then we know that here in Columbus, the Black household makes around $48,000 a year, whereas the white household makes about $70,000 to $72,000. So I highlight those points specifically because we know that the credit score system, like I said, has been weaponized and often used to keep the impoverished in poverty. Women, especially Black women, tend to have less access and exposure to opportunity. And we're often disenfranchised simply based on our genetic makeup and or where our ancestors landed or were dropped off when they got to North America. So this is why I champion entrepreneurship. Yes, we know access to capital is a very large barrier, and access to opportunity still does flow into the business sector. But we also know that entrepreneurship is the quickest way to pay yourself and those around you the due wages. So I'm very excited about this legislation, and I do support it, as do our organizations, and we definitely support your effort. So kudos.
Thank you for being here this evening. Again, thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the additional statistics that you showed or that you shared here this evening. I think it's always difficult when we're sharing things, right? Because there's so much information and data points out there. And I think that when we have supporters that can come in and say, here's other things, right, that we want to add to the conversation. Here's other perspective. I mean, the fact that, you know, the average score in the state of Ohio is 685?
85. Yeah.
685, I mean, I think it's telling as we talk about, especially around credit history and your credit score. And again, I think, you know, as we've been talking about this legislation, we've said this is a moment in time. It is a snapshot of this moment in your life, not the totality of your character. And I think that we have to move beyond what are the elements, other elements that we're looking for, you know, again, in specific industries for how we are measuring character or risk or ability to do the work, right?
Yes.
And so I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate your advocacy here this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Baker, come on down. Yes?
You did say the best for last. Look out.
Just kidding. Just kidding. Everybody's great.
All right. So, turn my computer on here. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here and to present this testimony. I appreciate you very much. So to the honorable council member and a distinguished guest, I am the fabulous Law Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I appreciate having this opportunity to share my voice and experiences with you in favor of this proposed legislation. I sit on the boards of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, Small Biz Cares, and Leadership Columbus. Every day, I take great pride in the work that I do to educate individuals and businesses on matters of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, engagement, and justice. Justice is why we are here today, and we must demand more from our governments, our corporations, and our citizens for our families, our neighbors, and our friends. Dr. Catherine Elder, PhD, a clinical psychologist, says beliefs about money are instilled in us at a very early age. Those messages shape our relationship with money. We hear and witness our parents' response to money, and we often internalize this in their beliefs and habits of our own. Moreover, she says, a generational lack of finances leaves inadequate preparedness for life. My earliest exposure to women in the workplace was from my mother. She worked outside of the home to provide for us financially, while my grandmother provided stability in our home. My mother was the first person in our family to go to college, a very important and monumental feat, especially considering she was born poor and Black in the Jim Crow era South. Despite her admirable intelligence and superior work ethic, My mother was never truly valued for her contributions. She always made far less than her white peers, all while having higher production and better outcomes. Even after working for over 60 years, my mother barely has enough money in retirement to take care of herself without assistance from me and my sister. There's a continuous myth of meritocracy in the workplace that is very pervasive. Like many women of color in our country, my mother's labor was, in fact, exploited. Her lifetime earnings pale in comparison to her white male counterparts, and she endured oppressive discrimination the entire time. McKinsey and Lean In Org released their 2022 Women in the Workplace report, and not surprisingly, the data shows an alarming yet consistent trend. 20% of Black women leaders experience having someone say or imply that you're not qualified, compared to 12% of all women and 6% for all men. 38% of Black women leaders experience being mistaken for someone at a lower level, compared to 20% of all women and 13% of all men. 55% of Black women leaders experience having your judgment questioned, compared to 39% of all women and 28% of all men. All of these microaggressions adversely impact us. We know that privilege exists in the workplace for many. We must acknowledge where there's disparity and make amends about what needs to be done for people that have impacted them for generations. This is not just about paying people more money. It's about ensuring fair and equitable pay for work. It should no longer be accepted to demand Ritz-Carlton work for Ritz-Cracker wages. Like many women frustrated with the troubling and problematic inequities of pay and disparate treatment, I confidently left the corporate world to become a full-time entrepreneur. I know that making this bold move is not for everybody, so I proudly stand with and hold space for as many people as I can through my advocacy and activism. We need positive change here in Columbus. The question is, do we have the moral fortitude and collective will to really make it happen? It's no longer enough to just talk about it. We have to be about it. So let's be the change we want to see in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You look at that, you got an applause and everything. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you for your continued advocacy, both on all of the boards that you sit on, but I know personally as well for causes that, especially for the advancement of women, women of color, for Black women. I appreciate you and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Before we close out, I just want to go back to Kirsten for just 1 second. So Kirsten, can you just give one quick reminder for folks of if the legislation does pass, just the timing, and then also just one last point on what the process would be if along the way there is, again, in the, if it does pass, timeline, and then also consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, legislation that comes through council is effective 30 days after passage. And so that is not true of this legislation. It is a 1-year implementation timeline because businesses need more than 30 days to change their HR practices. So yeah, it's a 365-day implementation period. That's the timeline. Regarding if there were to be an issue of someone in Columbus after this legislation is not just passed, but in that after that implementation mark, if someone were to experience an issue of being asked about their salary history or being asked about their credit history in a situation where the exemptions do not apply, they would be able to go to the Community Relations Commission, which is an existing commission here at the City of Columbus within the Department of Neighborhoods. And that commission currently hears issues related to discriminatory practices. And so this legislation would expand their purview to systemic discriminatory practices like what we're talking about tonight. And they would receive that complaint and they would do a preliminary inquiry into the practices, hear from the business about if this is something that they do indeed still practice. Maybe they hadn't heard about our legislation or feel that it's very important to their work. And they would just try to mediate that situation and support them in ending that practice. If for any reason the business were to be resistant to that or not be willing to comply, there are civil fines that could be implemented after an extensive hearing process. That is already the process that the Community Relations Commission goes through. So it would just be their normal process that's already in our city code, but just relating to these practices rather than the other practices that they oversee.
Thank you, Kirsten. So I want to thank everyone who was here, who joined us in person. I want to thank the folks who also provide written testimony. Again, this is our first public hearing. We have also conducted smaller roundtable conversations. At this point, we're at nearly 100 business owners from small to large corporations, and we'll continue to hear and continue this process of listening to community, listening to business owners. I'm the daughter of a small business owner. I know what it takes to run a business, understand the pressures that our business owners are under, understand, especially in the pressures right now of thinking about how do we attract and retain workers, how do we keep them. This is a strategy to do that. You know, especially, and we were having this conversation earlier, especially at a time when, you know, our state legislature is presenting opportunities that make Ohio maybe a less desirable place to come and work. This is a strategy this signals to the community that we are invested in equity. This signals to the community that if you're doing business in Columbus, you're not just doing business in Columbus, but you're doing the business of Columbus. And you are invested in our people and their prosperity. So again, I want to thank Kirsten and Jessica Casares, my legislative aide, for all of your work around this legislation. There will be more to come. We will continue to have these conversations. If folks are interested in hearing more, if they are want to provide testimony written, please contact my office. You can contact Amaris Lemus at aslemus@columbus.gov. And with that, thank you all and have a great Fat Tuesday. Good night.